doesn't just stay on one straight line. Actually, what happens is through the course of this is actually making tiny, almost immeasurable adjustments to stay on track. Because if it was one straight line, you've got winds, you've got weather, you've got so many things that you can end up in Tokyo or Paris or Russia. I mean, who knows where? Because if you're not making those little adjustments, then how do you know if you're on course? And the same is true with strategy. So I think the ones that make the biggest impact are not siloed. They're synergistically working together, but they also have key metrics that you're looking at to make sure that you're actually on track. It's not just, oh, we have this vision and this strategy is this thing over here that we don't really ever look at. It's something that is that guidance system to make sure that at the end of 90 days or a quarter, a year, or whatever, you can say, hey, we're on track, or, oh crap, we're not.
So let's also, at this front end piece, let's also talk about the difference in strategy and tactics. Because so often I know that in meetings that I sit in, I listen to people talking about things and the strategy word comes up. And the first thing they actually start talking about are things that are clearly tactical actions. They're not actually the strategy themselves. So do you have a way where you sort of, I'm going to say, force people into actually dealing with strategy as the big concept before breaking it down? Or do they tend to regurgitate tactics to you out of which you then build a strategy because you understand what they're actually trying to achieve because of what they're telling you about the tactics?
Oh, that's a really good question. Another great curveball. And I think it's a little bit of a chicken or an egg question, but I like it. And I think that the way for me to answer that is the biggest thing that I help entrepreneurs understand is the difference between a goal and a project. So in this example, a goal would be probably the equivalent, and I've never said this before, so let's just go with this. The goal would be the equivalent of strategy, whereas the tactic would be the equivalent of a project. So a goal would be, let's say you want to make $1 million this year. That's a great goal, but there's so many things that go into making $1 million. Maybe it's a new product, maybe it's an existing product, maybe it's retainers, maybe the stock market goes bonkers, maybe the stock market crashes. Who knows? There's so many things that can impact that $1 million. But so that's your goal, that's your strategy, I guess, the overarching strategy. But then the projects and the tactics are what are the daily things you have to do to get there. So like a project would be, let's say, getting 4 more retainer clients or launching this new group program or something like that. And I think you can't have strategy without tactics, and you can't have tactics without strategy, because otherwise you're just doing things to be busy. And I think that's something that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with. And what I help them understand is what's most important now? What's going to move the needle most if you do that today? And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but if you don't do X today, are you going to be on the trajectory up or the trajectory down? And so I think sometimes people get strategy such an ambiguous term that it overwhelms people. So they default to a to-do list, which I think are tactics. Yeah. And so I think you can build a strategy from a to-do list, and you can also build a to-do list from a strategy. And I think they're all connected in a way that you can't necessarily separate them until you have the big picture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. I think it's it is interesting because I do think it takes a piece of vision. You have to be a person who's capable of vision to saying $1 million is a very empirical measurement, as it were.
Yeah.
But it does also create a good example because you have to go through some strategic actions, and you mentioned pillars previously. So within that, inevitably or presumably, people are going to have to do something about personnel. Now, whether that's hire full-time people, whether it's build a virtual team, whatever it might be, subcontractors, who knows? Mm-hmm. But you have to have a strategy in place about how you're going to bring those people on board. When's the right time for the different people as you go through those layers of revenue? And that, again, I think says that if you pick something like $1 million goal, it also proves the fact you need to get those pillars intertwined together. They have to come together. You can't go off in one direction, employ a load of people, if you don't have a sales strategy to give them something to do, quite frankly, as a piece of execution. So again, I
Yeah.
think it pretty much goes to prove the point that, yes, it all very much goes together. But how you break it down and what you start with and whether you go up or down through that chain, I think is very much dependent upon the person and the business owner and where they are at any point in time. But the skill, of course, is being able to take either end of that and manipulate it to create the other end, and then make it clear for the person about what that path looks like. So I
Yeah.
just want to ask you, I think that a lot of people hold the view that strategy by implication has to be complex. There is this sort of big thing, strategy, or it must be complex, and it must be difficult to do because it's sort of the big strategy word. But I don't personally subscribe to that myself. I think that the best strategies are often the simplest. They can be very short sentences. It's the detail that comes after that that creates the real impact and the thing that moves the needle, as it were. Where do you sit on that? Do strategies have to be complex? Can they be simple? How do we make them simple?
Yeah, well, back to my tagline, make things simple and grow. Or actually, I think it's technically make strategy and online simple so you can grow. But I don't prescribe to that belief that it needs to be difficult or complex or anything like that. And in fact, I can tell you that the more complex and hard to understand you make your strategy, the less anybody can implement it or act on it, but also the harder it is to convey to your team, which you need. You know, whether you're a team of one with a virtual assistant or a team of 10, you know, you have to be able to articulate why it's important, how it's going to help everybody, and how you can actually reach that strategic goal, whatever that may be. And actually, I was looking at a book on my bookshelf, Donald Miller, who wrote Story Brand, which is a great book I recommend to every entrepreneur. Really has a great saying of doesn't pass the caveman test, because the thing with being entrepreneurs, you know, our business is our baby, but at the same time, if I pulled myself out of Golden Key Partnership tomorrow, would my business be able to carry on? And if the answer is no, then that means that your strategy is either not in place or it's not articulated enough that people understand what their roles are and how to keep you moving forward. So the more simple you can make it, the more easy to follow, the more, you know, checklists are great. Back to my analogy with airplanes. An airplane doesn't take off the ground before a checklist is done. So having those pillars and what's important in those pillars and a checklist is going to help you move much more quickly and efficiently than having all this ambiguous, complicated strategy.
I think it's one of the interesting things, your comment about what moves the needle today, that gets you into those tactical actions. It creates momentum. The idea of a checklist, you can physically see progress being made at that point as well, which is good for the soul. Now that it kind of leads me actually into one of the other questions that I had for you. Do you think that there is a particular mindset involved around either being strategic or being able to be strategic? Do you think that it's a quality that everybody possesses? It's just a question of teasing it out of them. Or are some people just not built for strategy, but they can execute against a task list all day long? How do you see that working?
So I think that you can learn strategy, but there are people who thrive. And there's actually a really great book, which I wish I had next to me right now, called Traction. And he talks about two types of people. I'm probably going to get this a little bit wrong, but basically visionaries and implementers. And I think that most entrepreneurs are visionary, and they have trouble actually implementing and getting in the trenches and doing those tactics. And so I think that it is something that when you're a party of one or a chief everything officer, you have to do all of those things, and it sucks. But it's good to get your hands dirty there. But if you can find somebody that really thrives in the strategic area or the visionary area, if you are more strategic, having those counterbalancing each other will help you move farther, because you can always learn a skill, but if it's not something that innately your brain really thrives on or you thrive in, then it's going to be like pushing a snowball up a hill. Eventually you'll get enough snow and it'll build on its own, but it's going to take you twice as long versus somebody who that's their jam. That's what they're really good at. Is going to take you a lot farther, which is why, when you look at Apple or Microsoft or any of the big companies that seem to have grown really quickly, it's because they had co-founders that very much were in that vision and the strategic, and they could work together to move it forward rather than trying to work against a current.
Yeah, that's it's interesting, because I think this business about doing the thing that we are good at is incredibly important, and recognizing the things that we're not actually built to do or that we're not capable of, and understand that then becomes something that we should delegate away somewhere, right. Is important. I just want to touch quickly actually on a very online thing, and the concept of building a sales funnel. Now, we see all day, every day, plenty of incredibly complex things of which people feel incredibly proud that there is this most enormous diagram of a sales funnel. Is that necessary? Can it be done more succinctly, do you think? Even taking that as a very small aspect of maybe an overall sales strategy. But within that, how we acquire and how we attract those people, do sales funnels have to be complex?
I don't think so. Again, I prescribe to simplicity. I do think the complexity comes from you being able to know if you are leading someone or if you're leaving somebody. That's like a really big thing that I go through with my clients when we go through and audit their business, because that's one of the first steps that when you work with me is we audit what you have already. And so the question of your funnel is, are you doing it to get to an end goal? And where does that end goal lead after they go through your funnel? Or if it's just a funnel to have a funnel. But it's really fascinating because, everybody's like, you need this many lead magnets or this or that. And the truth is, no, you need exactly how many your business needs. Some businesses' funnels are longer because they have a longer sales process and a different product. Some are very short. And so you have to figure out what fits your business and, trying to carbon copy. It's very funny. I get a lot of people are like, I want to be like Amy Porterfield or Marie Forleo or Brendan Burchard. And I'm like, that's a great aspirational place to be. But again, to eat the elephant one bite at a time, you're not there yet. So we have to figure out your unique offer, value, business model to get you there. But there's a lot of stuff under the surface that you don't see that makes it look simple, but it's not. If you look at Brendan's, his complexity is not with the funnel necessarily that somebody sees externally. It's what happens when they go through steps in the funnel. And so I think the more simple your funnel is to your audience, the more success you'll have. And then the more you can think through that journey, then the more success you'll have long-term, because you can build that relationship with them where they are and where you want them to go. But websites are really funny. I've seen websites that look like they're from the 1980s and I think are atrocious to look at, but they have a 90% opt-in rate. It's absolutely bonkers. And then you have a beautiful website that has a 1% opt-in rate because people get lost and they don't know where you want them to go or what you want them to do. And so it's just a matter of figuring out where you want to lead somebody and how to give them an off-ramp to do exactly what you want them to do.
So that's really interesting, because I know that you do have, amongst all the strategy pieces, you do have a background within websites and web development. So let's take that from a strategic point of view then. The concept of people being taken to a website, be it because they click on a tweet or they follow a link in Instagram, Facebook, whatever it might be, but they end up on a website. What are the things that you tend to see from a